At 2:17 in the morning on April 30th, 1944, Nancy Wake stood in total darkness inside the open doorway of a Royal Air Force Halifax bomber flying over occupied France, 20,000 feet above enemy territory. The wind screamed past the aircraft at over 200 miles per hour, tearing at her uniform, pulling at her parachute harness, trying to drag her into the night before she was ready. She was 31 years old. Behind her, the red jump light glowed like a warning. Ahead of her, there was nothing but black sky and enemy territory. Nancy adjusted her grip on the static line and looked down through the open door. Somewhere below, invisible in the darkness, waited Nazi-occupied France. German patrols, roadblocks, informants, men with orders to capture her alive if possible, or kill her if necessary. The Gestapo had already given her a nickname, the White Mouse, because she kept escaping them. Because no matter how many times they closed the trap, she was always gone by the time they arrived. The jumpmaster tapped her shoulder. 2 minutes. Nancy nodded calmly. She did not look afraid. But fear was there. It was always there. Anyone who claimed otherwise was lying or already dead. She had learned to carry fear the way soldiers carried weapons. Use it. Control it. Never let it control you. Below her, France was waiting. 3 years earlier, she had been living a completely different life. In 1939, Nancy Wake was a journalist in Marseille, a lively port city on the southern coast of France. She had come to Europe from Australia chasing stories, chasing freedom, chasing something larger than herself. She found it in France. She found it in Henri Fiacca. Henri was a wealthy industrialist, quiet and thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He fell in love with Nancy's fearlessness, her independence, her refusal to accept limits. They married in 1939. 3 months later, Germany invaded France. Everything changed. By June 1940, the German army had crushed French resistance. Nazi flags hung from public buildings. German soldiers patrolled the streets. The Gestapo arrived soon after. They brought fear with them. Nancy saw it immediately. People disappeared overnight. Neighbors whispered. Friends stopped talking. France was no longer free. Nancy had a choice. She could stay safe, or she could fight. She chose to fight. At first, her role was small. She carried messages between resistance cells. She helped hide escaped Allied airmen. She used her charm and confidence to move through German checkpoints without raising suspicion. She looked like someone who belonged. She dressed well. She smiled. She made German officers underestimate her. That was their first mistake. By 1941, Nancy had become one of the resistance's most important couriers. She transported documents, weapons, and intelligence across southern France. She memorized routes, checkpoints, patrol schedules. She never carried written notes. If captured, there would be nothing to find, nothing to prove. She became invisible. But invisibility did not mean safety. The Gestapo began to notice patterns. Convoys ambushed, airmen escaping, resistance networks surviving longer than expected. Someone was helping them. Someone was moving faster than German intelligence. Someone they could not catch. The Gestapo began hunting her specifically. They posted her description. They offered rewards for information. 5 million francs. A fortune. They interrogated suspects. They arrested friends. They tortured prisoners. Still, Nancy Wake remained free. She changed her appearance constantly. Different clothes, different hair, different identities. She rode bicycles across hundreds of miles of countryside. She walked through checkpoints with forged papers and steady nerves. She smiled at men who would have shot her on sight if they knew who she was. Each day she survived was a victory. Each day increased the risk. By 1942, the danger had become unbearable. The Gestapo raided her home in Marseille. Nancy escaped minutes before they arrived. Henri stayed behind. He was arrested. Nancy wanted to surrender herself to save him. Her resistance contacts refused. If she surrendered, the network would collapse. Hundreds would die. She escaped to Britain instead. She crossed the Pyrenees Mountains on foot, evading German patrols, freezing, starving, refusing to stop. It took 6 attempts. 6 failed crossings. 6 times she was forced back. The 7th time, she made it through. She reached Spain, then Britain, then the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Britain's secret army. Their mission was simple: parachute agents into occupied Europe, train resistance fighters, sabotage German operations. Prepare for the Allied invasion. Nancy volunteered immediately. She did not hesitate. She did not ask if she was ready. She knew she was. The British trained her harder than any soldier. Weapons, explosives, radio communications, hand-to-hand combat, survival, escape, killing. She learned how to kill silently, how to break a man's neck in seconds, how to disappear into shadows. She excelled at everything. Her instructors quickly realized something unusual. Nancy Wake did not freeze under pressure. She became calmer, more focused, more dangerous. By 1944, the Allies were preparing for the invasion of Normandy. They needed resistance networks ready to strike. Railways destroyed. Communication lines cut. German reinforcements delayed. Nancy Wake was chosen to lead one of those missions, which was why, at 2:19 in the morning, she stepped out of the Halifax bomber and into empty space. The night swallowed her instantly. The roar of the engines vanished. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She fell through darkness, alone, toward Nazi-occupied France. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. No sound, no ground, no certainty. Then her parachute opened. The silence returned. Nancy drifted downward, watching the faint outline of forests and fields below. Somewhere down there, German soldiers were sleeping. Somewhere down there, the Gestapo was waiting. Somewhere down there, men were already looking for her. She smiled slightly. Let them look. They would not find her. Not yet. She hit the ground hard, rolled, and immediately cut her parachute free. Within seconds, she was moving. The mission had begun. And before it ended, Nancy Wake would become the most dangerous woman in Nazi-occupied France. At 2:41 in the morning, Nancy Wake lay motionless in a hedgerow, listening. The parachute drop had gone perfectly. No alarms. No gunfire. No German patrols. Just silence and darkness across the rolling hills of central France. But silence in occupied territory meant nothing. German patrols moved unpredictably. Informants lived in every village. One mistake, one sound, one shadow in the wrong place, and the Gestapo would close their trap. Nancy gathered her parachute quickly, burying it beneath loose soil and brush. Every trace had to disappear. German search teams were trained to spot disturbed earth, broken branches, unnatural shapes. Survival depended on leaving nothing behind. She checked her equipment. Sten submachine gun, Colt pistol, a knife strapped to her thigh, explosives packed carefully in her drop container. Everything she needed to wage war alone. A faint signal flashed twice in the distance. Her reception committee. Nancy moved immediately, crouched low, moving through darkness with practiced precision. She reached the rendezvous point 3 minutes later. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, rifles ready, eyes scanning. One stepped forward. Password. Nancy answered without hesitation. Liberté. The man lowered his weapon. Welcome back to France, madam. These men were Maquis, the French resistance fighters who had been hiding in forests and mountains for years, waiting for the moment when they could strike openly. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, students. Ordinary men turned into soldiers by occupation. Nancy was not ordinary. She had returned to organize them into an army. Within 48 hours, she reached the main Maquis camp deep inside the Auvergne Mountains. It was hidden beneath dense forest, invisible from the air, protected by terrain and secrecy. More than 7,000 resistance fighters were waiting there. Poorly armed, poorly supplied, but ready to fight. Nancy wasted no time. She established communications with London using her wireless operator. Every transmission lasted less than 2 minutes. German radio direction units could triangulate a signal in 5 short messages, precise coordinates, supply requests. Within days, RAF bombers began dropping weapons, machine guns, rifles, explosives, ammunition, everything the resistance needed. Nancy personally supervised training, weapons handling, ambush tactics, sabotage techniques, discipline. She demanded perfection. Mistakes meant death, not just for the fighter who made them, but for everyone nearby. Many of the men were older than her. Some had fought in World War I. Some doubted her at first. A woman commanding armed fighters. It was not something they expected. Their doubts disappeared quickly. Nancy led from the front. She marched with them. She trained with them. She fought with them. She never asked anyone to take a risk she wouldn't take herself. Word spread quickly through German intelligence. Resistance activity had increased dramatically. Railways destroyed. Supply convoys ambushed. German patrols disappearing. Someone new was organizing the Maquis. Someone dangerous. The Gestapo knew her name. Nancy Wake. They increased the bounty on her head. 5 million francs. Dead or alive. They distributed her photograph to every German unit in France. Her face became one of the most recognizable targets in occupied Europe. She responded by becoming even more aggressive. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after the D-Day landings, Nancy led one of the most devastating sabotage operations of the war. German reinforcements were moving toward Normandy by rail. Thousands of troops. Hundreds of armored vehicles. If they reached the front, they could slow or even stop the Allied advance. Nancy's mission was to stop them. She divided her fighters into small sabotage teams. Each team carried explosives. Each team had specific targets. Railway bridges, track junctions, signal stations, communication lines. Nancy personally led the assault on a heavily guarded railway hub. German sentries patrolled constantly. Machine gun nests covered the approaches. Searchlights swept the area. A direct attack would have been suicide. Nancy chose infiltration. Under cover of darkness, she and 2 fighters crawled through mud and brush for nearly 2 hours, moving inches at a time. German boots passed within feet of her face. One wrong movement would have meant immediate execution. They reached the target. Nancy placed explosives carefully along the rail line. Set the timer. Moved away. At exactly 2:12, the charges detonated. The explosion tore through steel and concrete. The railway line collapsed. A German ammunition train derailed seconds later. Secondary explosions followed. Fire lit the sky. German reinforcements were delayed for days. Similar operations across the region multiplied the damage. German command struggled to respond. They launched search operations. Thousands of troops swept the countryside. They interrogated civilians, burned villages, executed suspects. Still, they could not find her. Nancy never stayed in one place longer than necessary. She moved constantly, camp to camp, village to village, always ahead of German patrols, always planning the next strike. Her most dangerous moment came in July 1944. Her wireless operator had transmitted too long. German direction-finding units triangulated the signal. SS troops surrounded the camp. Nancy escaped minutes before they arrived. Her wireless codes were compromised. Without them, communication with London would stop. Supply drops would stop. The resistance would lose its lifeline. Nancy volunteered to fix it. The nearest secure transmitter was over 200 kilometers away. She would have to travel alone. Through German-controlled territory. Through checkpoints. Through patrol zones. Without being recognized. She took a bicycle. And rode. She rode for 72 hours. Through forests. Across rivers. Past German checkpoints. She avoided main roads. She avoided villages. She slept less than 2 hours total. When she arrived, exhausted and covered in mud, she transmitted new codes successfully. Then she rode back. Another 200 kilometers. 400 kilometers total. One of the longest solo courier missions of the war. German intelligence never knew she had done it. They only knew the resistance was still operating. Still striking. Still fighting. Nancy Wake had become more than a courier. More than a spy. She had become a battlefield commander. The Gestapo called her their most dangerous enemy in France. They had entire units assigned to capture her. They failed. Every time. Because Nancy Wake understood something her enemies did not. This war was not about surviving. It was about winning. And she intended to win. No matter the cost. At 4:18 on June 20th, 1944, Nancy Wake stood at the edge of a forest clearing, watching German trucks roll slowly along the road below. 23 vehicles. 2 armored cars. More than 200 German soldiers. They were hunting her. She counted them calmly, her breathing steady, her mind already calculating angles, timing, escape routes. Behind her, hidden in the trees, 60 Maquis fighters waited in absolute silence. Farmers, students, shopkeepers, men who had never imagined they would fight trained German troops. Nancy had trained them, and today they would fight. She knelt beside her second-in-command, Henri Tardivat, a former mechanic who now carried a British Sten gun and wore stolen German boots. "They'll reach the bend in 2 minutes," she whispered. Henri nodded. The bend was perfect. A narrow section of road where vehicles would slow. Dense forest on both sides. No easy escape. Nancy had chosen it carefully. This was not an ambush. This was an execution. She checked her watch. 4:19, 1 minute. Her fighters lay prone behind fallen logs, rifles aimed, fingers resting on triggers slick with sweat. She could feel their fear. Not weakness. Awareness. Fear kept men alive. Fear made them careful. She raised her hand. The first German truck entered the kill zone. For 20, she dropped her hand. The forest exploded. Machine guns roared. Rifles cracked. Explosives detonated beneath the lead vehicle, flipping it onto its side in a burst of dirt and flame. German soldiers screamed, diving for cover, disoriented and exposed. Nancy fired controlled bursts, her Sten gun bucking in her hands. She saw a German officer reaching for his pistol. She shot him before he cleared leather. Henri destroyed the rear vehicle with explosives, trapping the convoy. The Germans were caught in a cage of fire. Some tried to escape into the forest. They ran straight into waiting Maquis fighters. The ambush lasted less than 6 minutes. When it ended, 38 German soldiers were dead. The rest fled or surrendered. Nancy moved immediately through the wreckage, checking her fighters. 2 wounded. None killed. It was a devastating success. But victory brought danger. German response would be swift. Brutal. She gave the order. Disappear. Within minutes, the forest was empty again. Only smoke and bodies remained. German command was furious. They deployed more troops, more patrols, more executions. Entire villages were burned in retaliation. Civilians were tortured for information. Some talked. Most did not. Nancy knew the cost of resistance. It was measured in blood. But stopping now would mean those sacrifices were meaningless. In early July, German forces launched a massive operation to destroy the Maquis. More than 10,000 German troops moved into the mountains, supported by artillery, armored vehicles, aircraft. Nancy's fighters were outnumbered nearly 200 to 1. Most commanders would have retreated. Nancy attacked. She divided her forces into small units. Hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, night raids, never staying in one place, never allowing the Germans to engage them directly. German supply trucks were destroyed. Fuel depots burned. Communication lines cut. German units found themselves isolated, confused, vulnerable. Nancy personally led many of these operations. She slept rarely, ate little, lived constantly on the edge of death. Her fighters watched her with awe. She was tireless, fearless, relentless. But even she was human. One night, during a security patrol, she encountered a German sentry alone in the dark. He turned suddenly, saw her, raised his weapon. There was no time to shoot. Gunfire would alert others. Nancy moved instantly. She closed the distance in 2 steps. Her knife struck his throat before he could speak. He collapsed silently. She lowered him gently to the ground. War had taught her this lesson. Speed, silence, survival. She never spoke of it afterward. There was no pride in killing, only necessity. By mid-July, German operations had stalled. They could not catch her, could not destroy her network, could not stop the sabotage. Nancy's forces had grown stronger, better trained, better equipped. Allied victories in Normandy meant liberation was coming. The Germans knew it. They became more desperate, more dangerous. Gestapo units intensified their search. They interrogated prisoners brutally. Some resistance fighters broke. Others died without speaking. Nancy carried the weight of those losses. Every death mattered. Every sacrifice drove her forward. She refused to stop. On August 12, 1944, German forces launched one final major assault against her position. Artillery pounded the forest. Trees exploded into splinters. Machine gun fire tore through undergrowth. Nancy moved constantly, directing fighters, coordinating defenses. Her voice calm, precise, unbreakable. The Maquis held. German forces withdrew. Defeated. For the first time since arriving in France, Nancy allowed herself a moment to breathe. The war was turning. Germany was losing, and she had helped make it happen. But her most dangerous days were still ahead, because the Gestapo had not given up, and they were closer than ever. On August 25, 1944, Nancy Wake stood on a hillside overlooking the valley below, watching German vehicles retreat east under constant attack. They were leaving. After 4 years of occupation, for years of executions, torture, fear, and resistance, The German army was finally collapsing in France. Allied forces were advancing rapidly after the Normandy landings. American armored divisions were pushing through the countryside. German supply lines were shattered. Their command structure was disintegrating, and Nancy had helped break it. But victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. She was 32 years old, but the war had aged her far beyond her years. She had lost friends, watched men die beside her, seen villages burn, seen courage and betrayal in equal measure. And she carried one loss heavier than all the others. Her husband, Henri Fiacca. Months earlier, the Gestapo had arrested him in Marseille. They knew he was connected to the resistance. They tortured him for information, beat him, starved him, tried to break him. He told them nothing. Not her name, not her location, not a single detail. They executed him anyway. Nancy would not learn the truth until after the war ended. She would carry the guilt for the rest of her life. Because she knew why he had died. He had died protecting her. On September 3, 1944, Allied forces liberated the region where Nancy had been operating. American tanks rolled through villages to cheering crowds. French flags appeared everywhere. People cried openly. Strangers embraced in the streets. German occupation was over. Nancy walked into one of the towns she had helped defend. People recognized her immediately. They called her by the name the Germans had given her. The White Mouse. Not with fear, with gratitude. She had become something more than a soldier. She had become a symbol. But she did not stay. There was still work to do. She helped identify collaborators, helped Allied intelligence dismantle remaining German networks, helped restore order to a country that had been broken by occupation. When the war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, Nancy was in Paris. She stood among thousands celebrating victory. But she did not celebrate. Her war was over. But the cost remained. She had joined the resistance to fight tyranny. She had become one of its most effective weapons. She had helped coordinate sabotage operations that destroyed German convoys, supply lines, and communications. She had trained and led fighters in direct combat. She had survived assassination attempts. She had outrun one of the most powerful intelligence organizations in the world. The Gestapo had put a 5 million franc bounty on her head. They had hunted her relentlessly. They had never caught her. After the war, her achievements became public. The Allies awarded her the George Medal for bravery. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre 3 times. The United States awarded her the Medal of Freedom. She became one of the most decorated women of World War II. But recognition never brought peace. She struggled with the memories, the loss, the violence, the responsibility. She rarely spoke about the war in detail. When asked how she had survived, she gave a simple answer. I just did what had to be done. She eventually left Europe and moved to Australia, the country where she had grown up. She lived quietly, worked ordinary jobs, avoided attention. Few people knew the truth about her. Few understood what she had done. But history did not forget. Military historians studied her operations. Intelligence agencies analyzed her tactics. Her ability to organize, survive, and fight behind enemy lines became legendary. She had done something few others ever achieved. She had fought the Gestapo and won. Nancy Wake died on August 7, 2011, at the age of 98. She lived long enough to see the world she fought for endure, long enough to see freedom preserved. Today, her name is remembered among the greatest resistance fighters of World War II. Not because she sought glory, but because she refused to surrender. She was hunted. She was betrayed. She lost everything. And she kept fighting. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous Allied spy. Her enemies feared her. Her allies trusted her. History remembers her, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a weapon. A woman who stood alone against one of the most brutal regimes in human history and refused to break. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse, the woman the Gestapo could never catch.